Wow, if we're this talkative this morning, imagine what it'll be like when we've had an hour more sleep next week. Okay, we are in our last lesson on the flood, and we're going to take a different look at it today. One that, if you have been the last few weeks, there's a phrase I like to use. If you've been sitting in the tension, let me assure you that's by design, because I feel like when we sit in the tension is when we learn. That when we look at a story in the Bible and we see it as, oh, it is this and it means this and it only means this and that's what it says. It's all tied up with a nice little bow. Then we figured we've got the puzzle figured out and we put it aside and we don't come back to it and it loses its interest. But by sitting in the tension and wrestling with the text, I think we find that there's new meaning, new insights, new things for us to puzzle out. And so we're going to look at hopefully tying some things up today a little bit. And then I really want to hear from you all, as opposed to having any answers about the flood and what it means. I'd like to hear more of what looking at the flood in these different ways has brought new meaning to you for the flood. And not just academic meaning, but does it give us something that we can, helps us understand God better, helps us understand how we should live better. So, we've been looking at the flood through these different lenses, and we've looked at the children's stories as our baseline. Then we looked at how we can critically ask questions of the text to see how that might expose things that we don't know or that we assume. We looked at some ancient Near Eastern flood stories. Last week we did some looking at how the flood story has been adapted into film. And today we're going to look at the creation story in the flood. And there are some real connections there that I think are fairly easy to overlook. And by taking a little closer look at the text, I think we'll also possibly see how the text constructs the flood as being a necessary thing in ways that maybe doesn't show up in the way English translates things. And we'll talk about that. So, we're looking at Adam and Noah. And I'm going to propose to you that in many ways Noah is a second Adam, and that what we see happen in creation gets undone in the flood in some pretty nice literary ways. So the first question that we got to ask is, how do we organize the book of Genesis? And one way that people organize this has been a matter of debate for quite a while. How do you make sense of this book? Where does it fit within the first 5 books of the Old Testament? Where does it fit within the overall structure of the Old Testament? And one way that people look at Genesis is that it sort of has this, call it a narrowing lens, a narrowing focus. It starts big. It starts with universal cosmic things. And it slowly begins to work itself down to Abraham and Abraham's family. And when you do that, it rolls very nicely right into Exodus. In fact, Exodus, the break between Genesis and Exodus is almost imperceptible in how one flows into the other. And that is not the case with most books in the Bible when you go from one to the next. They don't necessarily flow. But Genesis to Exodus flows almost like it's the next sentence. Okay? And so you get Genesis 1:1 through 11:26, which is kind of what we call primordial history. Okay? Which is big picture things. Why do we call this? Why are there different languages on the earth? The flood. All these sorts of big cosmic sorts of things. And then starting in chapter 11, verse 27, we see Abraham, and it begins to focus very, very specifically on him. The other way to look at it is what is called the Toledot. Toledot is a Hebrew word that means, depending on how it gets translated, generations or descendants. And in the course of throughout the book of Genesis, we have the text gets marked off repeatedly by this phrase, these are the descendants, Ele Toledot. And then it gives the name of some individual. Sometimes it gets translated, these are the generations, depending on what version you're using. And it's broken up by 10 characters. Bing, 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 bing. 10 is a very biblical number. So the text has been ordered very specifically according to these 10 generations. And so we see the first one is in Genesis 2:4, and it's interestingly, these are the generations of the heavens and the earth. And then we get in 5:1, these are the descendants of Adam, and then Noah, and then Noah's sons, and then Shem, and then Terah, and then Ishmael, and then Isaac, and then Esau, and then Jacob. And so we're going to focus a little bit on what we see in the first three. These are the generations of heavens and earth, the descendants of Adam, and these are the descendants of Noah. And when we look at the creation story, I want to pull out something that is relevant to what we see when we look at the flood narrative. So this is starting in Genesis 1:26. Then God said, let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the wild animals of the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. So God created humankind in his image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves upon the earth. God said, see, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is upon the face of the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. And every beast of the earth, and every bird of the air, and everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has breath of life, I have given every green plant for food, and it was so. God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. A couple things I want to point out. That first of all, if you read this in Hebrew, it's poetry. Okay, this repetition of phrases that you see, why is he saying this twice? Why do we have dominion over the birds in the air all these times? It's a poetic structure. So the language in Hebrew is poetic, but it's also language that makes you question, how do I translate it? Because the word for humankind is ha-Adam, the Adam. And it is, it's confusing because if you look at it, it says, so God created, it says, the Adam in his image. In the image of God, he created them, plural. Male and female, he created them. So is Ha-Adam male or female? Yes. Okay. And so, and I'll talk about this towards the end of class. We're going to talk about this in January. But it gives translators a real problem. How do I translate this? And the word ha-adam, ha is the in Hebrew, that's what we call the direct particle. It's the. Okay? It's not a name. Okay? It probably is best described, and Adam comes from the Hebrew word for ground. So, if I were going to translate it literally, I would call it the groundling. Okay? The groundling doesn't have a name yet. Okay? The groundlings are not named Adam and Eve yet. Okay? They are the Adam, the ground things, the things made from ground. And he gives them this charge that they are to be fruitful and multiply over the face of the earth and have dominion over all of these things. And he gives them all the plants for food, not the animals. And I want to point out that it says that God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. Now, let's fast forward to the Toledot for Adam. It starts out this way. This is the list of the descendants of Adam, or these are the generations of Adam. When God created humankind, Ha-Adam, okay, he made them in the likeness of God, male and female, he created them, and he blessed them and named them Ha-Adam, humankind, when they were created. This is how the generations of Adam starts in this passage. Very similar to what we see in Genesis 1, just much, much shorter. But how does it end? If you go to the end of this section, just before the Toledot of Noah, how does it end? And it says, when people began to multiply on the face of the ground, that's on the Adamah, and the daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that they were fair, and they took wives for themselves of all that they chose. The Lord said, my spirit shall not abide in mortals forever, for they are flesh. Their days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went into the daughters of humans, who bore children to them. These were the heroes of old, warriors of renown. The Lord saw that the wickedness of humankind, Ha-Adam, was great in the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of their hearts was only evil continually. And the Lord was sorry that he had made humankind, Ha-Adam, on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart, so that the Lord said, I will blot out from the earth the human beings, the Ha-Adam, I have created, people together with animals and creeping things and the birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the sight of the Lord. Now, what I want you to notice is between the beginning and the end of this section of generations of Adam, have they fulfilled God's charge? What does God charge them with?
Caretakers and to multiply.
Okay. Be fruitful and multiply and care for creation. Have they been fruitful and multiplied?
Obviously, looks like.
Yes. It says they began to multiply on the face of the ground. Yes, they have. Where's the problem? There's two problems. At least two.
Well, the Nephilim have come down and they have interfered with how God had his plan for the earth. And in doing that, the people no longer are caretakers of the earth.
Okay. There is definitely this very odd passage we've talked about before about these sons of Elohim, sons of God, sons of gods, depending on how you want to translate it. Interesting, the way this is structured, Yahweh the Lord seems to have separated himself from these sons of God, these divine beings, whatever they are. He stands apart from them in the way this text is structured.
And it also looks like, because he said warriors, so I'm thinking there's been wars and fighting and all that.
Okay. Yeah, so there's been a disruption there has been something happening between the divine realm and the human realm that is causing things not to be as God intended them to be. And we've talked a little bit about that. I don't want to get into a ton of it, other than this sort of language is very common in lots of other traditions. This mixing of cosmic divine blood with humans. We see it in the Gilgamesh epic. We see it in all sorts of ancient Near Eastern and Mediterranean literature, and it seems like the Bible has picked it up and turned it to be that this is not a good thing. This is not a good thing. And then it says that he saw the wickedness of humankind, every inclination of their thoughts was only on evil. And it says, notice that it says before, it's that he saw what he created and it was good. Now God saw the wickedness that was great on the earth and every inclination. So there's, again, this parallel. God saw that it was good, and now God sees that it's really bad. And he regrets having done it. And he says, I'm going to wipe it all out. But then we get this disjunctive, and this is, again, it doesn't show up in English the way it does necessarily in Hebrew. But the way Hebrew tends to work is, it's, when you're reading Hebrew narrative, it's and verb subject, and verb subject, and verb subject. That's the way you get these clauses all strung together. But then you'll find occasionally where it'll make a break. And the break in this case is and subject verb. And that's what happens at the very end of this passage in verse 8. And, or in this case, but Noah found favor in the eyes of God. Okay, so there's a disruption when you're reading the text. You're expecting and verb subject, and verb subject, and verb subject, and subject. Oh, I need to stop here because something important has just changed. God has found Noah, and Noah's not following the pattern. And so what we see is that things have gone from very good to very bad. Filling the earth, being fruitful and multiplying, but there's also been a multiplying between daughters of humans and divine beings. And that God saw, in one case it was very good, and in the next case he's seen the wickedness was very great. So, let's go to the next Toledot, which is Noah. These are the descendants of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. Noah walked with God, and Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now, this is the first time the word righteous is used in the Hebrew Bible. First time. Blameless is a word that later gets used to describe what? Does anyone know? Sacrifices without blemish. Blameless sacrifices. And Noah walked with God. What does that tie to? Adam and someone else. Enoch walked with God. Okay? And we'll notice Noah now has 3 sons. Now we get the summary again in the Toledot of Noah. It says, now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence, And God saw that the earth was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted its ways upon the earth. And God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. And now I am going to destroy them along with the earth. Make yourself an ark of cypress wood, make rooms in the ark, and cover it inside and out with pitch. Something that doesn't come through here that's in the Hebrew that they try to do, but there's an interesting play. The earth was corrupted. Okay, it's passive. Okay, in other words, it doesn't say men corrupted the earth. It says the earth was corrupted. The implication is by men. Okay, and then what we get a little bit later, I'll talk about in just a second. What do we mean by corrupted? The Hebrew word is shachat, which really means ruined or spoiled. So the earth was ruined. Now, if we think back to last week and Darren Aronofsky's song about Noah, one of the things he plays off of very strongly in that is that men had ruined the earth. It was barren, except for very minor places. But he picks up on this meaning of shachat from Hebrew, which is it's been ruined, it's been spoiled. But now when he says, now I am going to destroy them along with the earth, what really doesn't show up in English is that it's the same word in Hebrew, just in a slightly different form. So instead of being a passive form of it was ruined, it has been ruined, he says, I'm going to make it ruined. Okay? I'm going to finish the task. So there's a cause and effect that shows up here that really makes the sense of divine justice a little bit more clear. Men have ruined and spoiled the earth. I'm just going to finish the job because that's what they've already started. Okay? Do you see that distinction, that difference? When we read it in English, we think they did something bad, and now I'm going to just punish them and wipe them all out. But what we see in the Hebrew is more of a, okay, you started it, you started the corruption, let's just finish it. Let's take it the rest of the way. And that's what God does with it. Okay? And what we see in this text, and what we see from what he tells Noah, is that God's justice is showing through, but it appears that what God's looking for is an opportunity for mercy. Okay? And he finds that opportunity for mercy in Noah. Now, so then we move to the end of the Toledot of Noah, and we see that God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Where have we heard that before? The fear and dread of you shall rest on every animal of the earth and on every bird of the air and everything that creeps the ground and on all the fish of the sea, and into your hand they are delivered. Every moving thing that lives shall be for food for you, and just as I gave you the green plants, I give you everything. Only you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is, its blood. For your own lifeblood I will surely require a reckoning. From every animal I will require it, and from human being, each one for the blood of another. I will require a reckoning for human life. Whoever sheds the blood of a human, by a human shall that person's blood be shed. For in his own image God had made Ha-Adam, humankind, and you be fruitful and multiply and abound on the earth and multiply in it. So, do you see the echoes back to creation? What are they? Be fruitful and multiply. What else?
In his own image.
In his own image. He's given them food, but he's expanded it. How's he expanded it?
Flesh.
Carnivores.
You don't need to be vegan anymore. Okay? You can eat meat.
I say that God makes the same choice that he did before. And that the first time God chose to create, and to create humans, and to create the earth. And now that we've messed it up, he's choosing again to rebirth it. So it's that choice.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a question about that.
Yeah.
So why do you think, initially, did God have the plan for Adam and Eve to have children and grow descendants in the garden, before they left? And I'm not sure about the answer to that.
So that's a curious question. Scholars debate that. In other words, when were the kids born? One scholar, his name is Zion Zevit, wrote a book called What Really Happened in the Garden of Eden. It's a wonderful book. It's imaginative. He claims that the way he reads the Hebrew of when God is providing the consequences for disobedience, I don't use the word fall on purpose because the text does not say the fall. The people are not cursed. The land is cursed. The snake is cursed, but not anything else. He thinks that the children of Adam and Eve, at least one or two of them, are already there, as well as perhaps offspring of snakes. And that the curse is more immediate, right then and there. You can read it either way. Yeah, we don't know. We don't know. The other thing we don't know is how long it happens, right? Jewish tradition says that on the seventh day they rested, all this happened, and Adam and Eve ate the fruit and got kicked out, all on day 7. That's Jewish tradition, at least one Jewish tradition. But there's no way to know. Yes, sir?
What is the significance of God stopping the use of blood?
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, so blood is the life force. There's a general recognition that the life is in the blood. And that, therefore, you should not eat, and I don't think this is a prohibition against rare steak. I think this is a prohibition against drinking the blood, the lifeblood, or eating the animal. It really is the precursor of kosher food laws, is what it amounts to. But later in Leviticus, blood becomes very important from a ritual perspective because blood is basically a spiritual detergent also. Blood removes impurity. A lot of impurity. So one of the keys in Leviticus is such a theologically profound book that we never read and we don't understand. But one of the keys is follow the blood. Follow where the blood is going because that tells you what it's doing. Okay? And by the way, I think that applies in the New Testament too. Follow the blood. Follow the blood.
What do you mean by that?
Where is the blood applied? Okay? In Leviticus, the blood gets applied to the holy implements. Why? It's purifying them. It's applied to the lobe of the priest's ear. Purifies him. Over time, the impurities of the people build up on the holy things, and God doesn't like to live in a dirty house. And so it has to be purged of impurity, okay, which they viewed as being kind of a real thing. And so you use blood to get rid of it. So, anyway, eating meat's a different one. That's different. What's that?
Creatures now, instead of being in harmony with the creatures, it's like you're fearing.
Okay, there's a disruption between
That,
the animals and
it's almost like
humankind.
you're separated.
Yes, yes. So let's look a little bit at what the flood does versus creation. So in creation, without going through everything, we see that what at the beginning of creation, what God does is God speaks order into chaos. So it begins, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and what we translate as the earth was formless and void. In Hebrew that's tohu vavohu, which is literally the words by themselves mean formless and void. But in modern Hebrew, a mother, when she walks into her 2-year-old's room and sees him scattering all the toys across the floor, she'll say, clean up all this tohu vavohu, okay? It's together, they mean absolute chaos, okay? And so God takes the chaos, he speaks into it, and he orders it. And what we see with the flood is chaos destroys the order.
That's equivalent to sin and righteousness.
Okay.
Is chaos and God.
Yep.
Order.
Good point. Good point. We see in Genesis that God separates the waters, the firmament, the waters above and the waters below. And what do we see in the flood? We see the release of the waters from above and the release of the waters from below. Okay? We see the land being uncovered. The waters separate from the land. And yet, in the flood, we see the land being covered by water again. In creation, we see that God creates life. In the flood, he destroys life. And in effect, the flood is kind of the ultimate cosmic reset. Control, Alt, Delete. Okay? When all else fails, reboot. Okay? So God undoes everything that he does in creation, gets undone in the flood. Now let's look at Adam and Noah. Adam, God blesses him, blesses them technically, Adam and Eve. Noah gets blessed by God also, and it's the same blessing. Adam and Eve are placed in a protected garden, okay, separate from the rest of creation. Adam and his family are placed in a protected ark. Adam cares for the ground. He's basically a tiller of the ground. Noah is also a man of the soil and tills a vineyard. Adam, when he realizes his sin, covers his nakedness. If we recall from the story of Noah, he gets his nakedness covered, okay, by his sons. Adam has 3 sons. Noah has 3 sons. One of his sons gets cursed. One of them gets killed. One of them gets cursed. And Noah curses one of his sons. Technically his grandson, but it's through the son. See the similarities? We could probably come up with a whole lot more. Okay.
They both fall. They both fall.
Okay, they both sin. Yep. I'm more of a mind that with Noah, his drunkenness is not so much a sin, it's a consequence of what he has experienced with the flood and the destruction. It's a recognition of the brutality of what he's experienced. It doesn't quite show up in the Hebrew and the Greek Bibles, but it says the Spirit of God hovers over the waters. The word hover is kind of a fun word. And when we look at what are called the Targums, which are it's like the Aramaic message version of the Bible. or what are called the Peshitta, which are the Syriac message versions of the Bible that try to, they're the text with a little bit of commentary added in. It adds in this verse that the Spirit of the Lord hovered over the waters like a dove. And Noah sends out a dove. Sends out a raven too, but he sends out a dove. So there's all these little connections between the flood and creation. And what we really have, I think, is it's a cosmic reboot. And Noah is the second Adam. There's one other fun connection. This word ark, we kind of take it for granted. Teva is the word. It's really kind of an odd word in Hebrew. And it's only used in 2 different stories.
Moses.
It's used in the ark, here in the flood story, and it's used in Moses being placed in the basket. The basket is an ark. Okay? It's not the word for ship. Hebrew has other words for ship or boat. It's got a couple of words. And it's not this. And I find that kind of curious. Basically, make a big basket and put a cover on it. And put all the animals in it.
But it's a safe haven.
It's a safe haven.
So what's the word for the Ark of the Covenant?
It's a different word. It's acharon. Yeah, it's a different word. Yeah. Yeah. It only shows up here and in Moses. And I think you could argue there's a similarity there too. Okay? Moses is the deliverer, but he's first delivered through the water. Okay. So, let's try to put all this together in the next few minutes. We've looked at children's stories. We've looked at asking questions. We've looked at some ancient sources. We've looked at the flood in film. And now we've looked at Adam and the flood, and Noah and Adam and how they work together. So, what have you seen in the flood story through this 4 weeks we've been looking at it, 5 weeks, that's new to you? What do you see that you hadn't seen before?
I think for me, it was the separation of the animals, because I always thought they were on this earth to oversee the earth, oversee and protect the animals and all that. And it's like, no, not now.
Okay,
Yeah.
kind of a change of mission a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. What else?
There's more depth to the corrupting of the earth than I saw before.
Okay, more
It's
depth.
a lot bigger. It's a lot bigger item of the corruption of the earth, the rooting of the earth. It's a lot broader than I thought it was.
Okay, what else?
I think the devastation that Noah must have felt, right? He just watched the whole world get destroyed, except for, what was on his ark, and it affects you.
Okay.
You can almost say it was one of the first PTSDs.
Oh, there's a whole lot of PTSD in the Bible that we overlook. Noah's the first. I think you're right. I got to believe Abraham suffered from some pretty serious PTSD, and so did Isaac, for that matter. And the text is pretty clear. Isaac suffers it. He doesn't leave with Abraham.
I think that, to me, it's drawing it. It was great that you started with the children's stories, and then led us up to what really occurred, and making that real.
I think it's interesting that there's so many ancient flood stories. I've read them myself at different times and wondered if they were all the same flood, told by different areas of the world. Was God doing a clean slate, or was he doing a slate right where Noah's group was? Or was he doing completely reforming the world?
Yeah. It is, to me, it is the clearest example of the Bible working with and commenting on a tradition that is almost everywhere, right? How does it address it? And sometimes what's really interesting, we didn't do a lot of it when we talked about it, is in some ways it's not surprising that the Bible talks about some of these same things. Like we have creation stories as well from a lot of different cultures.
Is this
it's
the
a-
same flood that was in
Yeah.
some of these ancient stories, or was it localized?
Oh, yeah. I think that's two different questions, but it's I think where there's interest is in not so much where they're similar, but also where they're different. What is the Bible doing with an ancient tradition and commenting on it to say something about the nature of God? And we see a lot of that with this story. In the Gilgamesh epic, the gods, in one sense, are they're going to wash out the people because they're too noisy. They're tired of it. But there's also this horrific aspect to some of the gods saying, "Who did this? This is not right." And we don't get that in the biblical text. But we see God doing it out of more of a, it's already ruined, I'm just finishing the task. So,
You
yes.
completely skipped over Genesis 2.
Okay.
This really helped me figure out and get in my head straight when we come up with all these cavemen and Neanderthal men, that they were like animals. So God
interesting.
did not see, he didn't like it, he breathed a different life breath into Adam when he created Eve. So that helps me reconcile the Neanderthal and killing the dinosaurs in the flood and killing the Neanderthal. That really helped me reconcile that.
Okay. Unless you go and see the Ark in Kentucky and there are dinosaurs on that Ark. Anything else? Anything else you saw? How do you see the flood differently? So, to me, if you haven't been to second service and haven't heard Wade's sermon, pure fire. One of the best I've heard in a very, very, very long time. And I'm always shocked at how there's so much relevance with what he's saying, and we're often studying in here, and I have no clue what he's going to talk about from week to week. But one of the things I think we see with Genesis, we see it with the flood, and this carries through into the New Testament and into the vision of Revelation for the end time. Is there is this continued hope that God's going to make things right. That the way things get on the earth, when not under the control of the kingdom of heaven, is jacked up. And that there's this human longing that it's not right. That righteousness and justice don't survive when humans are in control. And that God desires to restore things to the way He wants them to be. We have the garden, it gets messed up. We have the flood, it's restart, and it gets messed up. And if you go to the book of Revelation and other writings in the New Testament, it's like God's going to make this right. There's an age to come where there's no more death, there's resurrected bodies, humans and animals living together, not to quote Ghostbusters, living together in harmony, walking with God, living with God on a renewed earth. And so what we see, I think, in looking at these two stories is we see that pattern continuing with an end goal in mind. And I think that's really good news. But it also tells us, at least what Noah tells me, is that in the meantime, as God's people, our goal is to walk with God.
Find favor with God.
In the here and now, bringing God's kingdom to this earth in anticipation of God's full restoration in the age to come. Wade says it much better than I do. So again, I hope what we've seen is that I think what I love about looking at stories like this through different lenses is it begins to expose our white space assumptions. What do we read into the text? And we do it all the time. It helps us see new details and depths in the story. It helps us make these intertextual connections from one part of the Bible to another. It causes us to ask questions about God and God's creation and God's relationship to creation, and then also asking us how we ought to live in God's creation. So, with that in mind, if we look at where we're going in the coming weeks, Jess is going to start next week a study that'll take us through December on fulfilling the mission of Christ. And then in January, I'm going to lead us on a study of women and men in God's kingdom. And we're going to take a very detailed biblical look at what the Bible really says and what it doesn't say about the roles of men and women in the kingdom of God. And I'm thinking it's going to be a lot of fun that will generate lots of discussion. So it's been a pleasure these last few months teaching, and I'm looking forward to Jess and his series.
I just want to say real quick, when you see my slide deck that I'm going to use next week, that was prepared before this lesson today. And when you look back at it, you're going to go, wow, that is really weird.
So thank you all very much for your grace, your kindness, and your participation.